Big Shaq walks into his own restaurant, unnoticed, but what he hears behind a bathroom door stops him cold. A waitress is crying, broken, scared, whispering about the manager no one dares challenge. She thinks no one's listening. She's wrong. As secrets unravel, so does the truth about what power really protects, and what it takes to tear it down quietly. One sound, one story, and everything changes. Big Shaq secretly walks into his restaurant, freezes after hearing a waitress crying in bathroom. Coming soon, based on the silence that sparked a storm. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was just past noon when Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as Big Shaq, stepped out of a modest black SUV and walked quietly across the sidewalk into Lucille's Table, one of his newest but most talked about restaurants in Atlanta. The day was bright, the air soft with the scent of warm bread and city ambition. No reporters, no entourage, no loud entrance, just Shaq, in a plain hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of scratched sunglasses that made him almost invisible despite being 7 feet tall and unmistakably famous. This wasn't a press event. It wasn't even on his schedule. It was instinct, something pulling at his chest for weeks, something he couldn't name. The restaurant, named after his mother, was supposed to represent warmth, equity, grace. But lately he'd been getting quiet complaints. Anonymous ones. Odd letters with no return address. A few concerning comments on social media that weren't loud enough to go viral, but specific enough to land in his conscience. So he showed up, unannounced. Inside, the restaurant hummed with lunchtime energy. Exposed brick, handcrafted wood beams, glass light fixtures, casting golden hues across plates of Southern meets global cuisine. Waitstaff moved in choreographed rhythm. Laughter from the tables rose in arcs, and the kitchen clanged with professional precision. He took a slow walk through the lobby and toward the back hallway that led to the employee break room and bathrooms. The hostess, young, attentive, gave him a curious glance, maybe recognizing the shape of him. Maybe not. He gave a nod, said nothing. The hallway was quiet, the air cooler there, tucked away from the buzz of customer chatter. That's when he heard it. Soft at first. So soft he thought it might be the plumbing. But then clearer, muffled crying, gasping in short bursts, barely contained, like someone was fighting hard not to be heard. It was coming from the women's restroom. He froze. It wasn't just sadness in that cry. It was something deeper, ragged, unfiltered, like grief dipped in fear. He didn't move for a moment, just listened. He leaned slightly toward the door, not close enough to intrude, but close enough to catch a sentence through the thin wood and the poor insulation. I can't go back out there, not after what he said. Then a pause, sniffling, and again, I don't care if he's the manager. Shaq's breath caught. The words hung in the air like smoke. He stepped back slowly. His hands curled into the fabric of his hoodie. His jaw tightened, not from anger, but from that hollow ache that came when something sacred was being chipped away without your knowing it. Lucille's Table was supposed to be different. That was the whole point. He built it with intention, open hiring practices, internal growth paths, inclusive menus, and regular staff counseling programs. He wanted it to be a place where everyone ate and worked with dignity. A table that welcomed all, no matter who they were or where they came from. But this cry behind a closed door, it told a different story. He turned away, stepped lightly down the hallway, and paused at the break room window. Through it, he saw the manager on duty. Connor Deeks, clean-shaven, expensive haircut, performative smile, talking to a group of servers like he was holding court. Every gesture of his oozed confidence, but something about him felt over-oiled, like a salesman trying to sell sincerity. Shaq didn't move yet. He wasn't ready to speak, not before he understood the whole picture. He made his way quietly to the back dining section, where fewer guests were seated. He slipped into a corner booth, tucked against the wall, with a full view of the main floor. A waitress came over, cheerful but slightly flushed, her smile mechanical. "Welcome to Lucille's, can I get you something to drink?" He looked up. It was her, eyes still a bit glassy, lower lid slightly swollen from tears, but the smile was plastered on like armor. She was young, maybe 23. Auburn curls pulled back in a hurried bun, apron slightly wrinkled, name tag crooked. Her name was Delaney. He simply nodded and said, "Water, please." She walked off without a clue. Shaq exhaled slowly, watching her. She moved like someone who had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. Efficient, quiet, uncomplaining. Every time she passed by the manager, her shoulders tensed just slightly. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her either. But his presence seemed to fill her space like a shadow. Something was wrong here. Deeply wrong. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone, not to make a call but to check the time. He noted the lunch rush would ease in about an hour. That's when he'd slip into the security room. He'd designed the whole place to be observable, without being intrusive. Every hallway camera tucked in natural corners, every feed running silently into a private server, accessible by his personal code. He'd check the logs, not just for today, but for the last 2 weeks. The voice behind that bathroom door deserved that much. Outside the window, Atlanta's sunlight painted patterns on the glass. Inside, Shaq sat silent, the restaurant buzzing around him, laughter rising, plates clinking. But all he could hear was the echo of a broken voice whispering, "I can't go back out there." Something was cracked beneath the polished surface, and Big Shaq had just heard it break. The hallway felt colder than it should have. The kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, but from silence. The sharp, drawn-out kind that fills the space between breaths when something's wrong. Shaq stood still, halfway between the break room and the restrooms, his shoulders squared but unmoving. He hadn't planned to stop. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the sound stopped him in his tracks. A cry. No, not just a cry. Something more brittle, more broken. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, and it came from behind the women's restroom door. At first he thought it might just be someone having a rough shift. Every job had its hard days. Maybe she got yelled at by a customer. Maybe she spilled a tray. Maybe life outside work was crashing in. But the more he listened, the more the layers peeled back. This wasn't the frustration of a bad day. This was grief trying not to be heard. The kind of weeping you do with your hand pressed over your mouth so no one knows you're breaking. He took one step closer, careful not to make a sound. The hallway was narrow and tucked away behind the kitchen, used mostly by staff. A humming utility light buzzed above, flickering slightly. He stood there, stone still, letting the moment speak before he did anything rash. His instinct wasn't to barge in, to announce himself like some savior. That's not how healing worked. Some things, you had to let play out just long enough to know what was really being said. Then he heard the words, "I can't go back there." Not after what he said. I don't care if he's the manager. They weren't shouted. They weren't meant for anyone but the air. But they cut through Shaq like a blade. He leaned back, just enough to rest against the wall behind him. The hallway felt smaller now, tighter, like the truth inside that restroom was pressing outward against the walls. It was her. He didn't know her name yet, but the voice was unmistakable. Young, trembling, trying to keep the cry contained. The kind of cry that didn't need a face to be understood. And the words, they weren't vague. They had a weight, a name. The manager, not someone random, someone with power. Shaq exhaled slowly through his nose, steadying the knot forming in his gut. So this was the smell behind the polish. The hidden rot beneath the shiny hardwood floors and perfectly curated brand image. He'd built this place to be different, built it from love, from legacy, from a belief that his name could mean safety for people who didn't always get it. And now, just past the soft jazz playlist and artfully plated entrees, there was a young woman sobbing behind a bathroom door because a manager had said something that made her feel, what? Small? Dirty? Powerless? He didn't know the exact words. But he didn't need to. Not yet. There was a long silence after her last sentence. No more sobs. Just the kind of heavy breathing that happens when someone's trying to push their pain back down their throat. Shaq wanted to say something. Part of him itched to knock gently, to say, "Hey, it's okay," or "I'm here." But he didn't. Not because he was afraid, but because sometimes presence matters more than words. And this moment didn't need a hero. It needed a witness. He stepped away, slow and deliberate, like pulling out of a dream. His sneakers barely made a sound against the tile. He turned the corner and walked back toward the front of the house, his mind racing. That voice was going to stay with him. That sentence, the tone. It had opened something. A quiet war had just begun, and no one knew it yet. Back in the dining area, the energy was vibrant again. The restaurant lived in its usual rhythm, laughter at a corner table, plates sliding across polished wood, the scent of thyme and garlic drifting from the kitchen. But for Shaq, the place looked different now. The floorboards felt less solid, the lighting seemed harsher. Every smile he passed looked slightly forced. He caught a glimpse of the manager, Connor Deeks, laughing with a pair of servers near the bar. His body language screamed charisma, hands gesturing wide, teeth flashing in performative charm. But now Shaq was tuned into the frequency beneath it. The fake warmth, the practiced pleasantries. It wasn't just leadership, it was theater. And if that cry behind the door meant what Shaq thought it did, Connor wasn't just playing a part, he was hiding behind one. Shaq took a seat in the back corner again, in the booth that gave him the best sightlines. He didn't look at Connor. He didn't need to. The picture was beginning to form in his mind. Not the whole story, not yet, but the shape of something real. A system out of alignment, a voice silenced behind a door that should have never been closed. He scanned the floor. A few minutes later, the waitress returned. Delaney. That was her name. He caught it on her name tag now that she passed closer. Her face was composed again, eyes a little red, but distant. She moved with robotic precision, tray balanced, voice polite, but she didn't smile anymore, not even the fake one. She was surviving the shift, nothing more. Shaq knew what he had to do. This wasn't something to fix with a public show or a quick firing. This was a thread that needed pulling, quietly, methodically, until the whole thing unraveled in truth. He was going to find out what happened, and when he did, it wasn't just going to be about accountability. It was going to be about justice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Not to text, not to post, but to open a secure app connected to the internal restaurant systems. Access granted. Cameras, time logs, shift schedules, personnel files. He didn't look up when she passed again. But this time she glanced his way. Just a flicker. Just enough to meet his eyes for a second. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't. But in that moment, Shaq silently promised her something. You're not alone anymore. Delaney Brooks moved like someone who had mastered invisibility. She carried her tray with mechanical grace, weaving between tables with just enough poise to seem professional, but never enough to draw attention. Shaq watched her from his booth near the corner window, low-key, slouched cap still shadowing his face, but his eyes never left her. There was something raw in the way she blinked, something buried behind the careful lines of her smile. A flicker of something broke, something trying not to be seen. He'd seen that look before. Not just on courts or in locker rooms where pressure bore down, but in classrooms, community centers, back alleys of systemic indifference. That look meant someone had been dismissed too many times. Someone had spoken up and been told to calm down. That look wasn't new to Shaq, but he never thought he'd see it in his restaurant. Delaney was young, maybe 24 at most, but her eyes carried decades. There was intelligence there, even defiance, but it had been worn thin like denim run through one too many storms. She moved like a performer trained to smile while bleeding. He kept watching. Connor Deeks, the manager, stood posted like a lighthouse in the center of the storm. Expensive watch, posture of a guy who mistook management for monarchy. He had that cool guy charm that turned sour the moment no one laughed at his joke. The kind of man who ran a tight ship when corporate was watching, and a toxic kingdom when they weren't. Shaq saw it immediately, the way Connor leaned too close to the younger servers, the jokes that walked a line but never quite crossed it legally, and the tone. Oh, that tone. Connor spoke to the white servers with casual camaraderie. You're crushing it today, Macy. Let's kill lunch, Tyler. To Delaney? Flat, curt, tightly measured. Not once did he use her name. Just instructions. Table 4's been waiting. Don't linger at the register. Polish the trays before clocking out. Shaq watched as Delaney, tray balanced on one hand, approached a couple near the patio doors. A black couple in their 50s, well-dressed, smiling. Shaq noted the warmth in their body language, the gratitude when Delaney greeted them. She lit up briefly, an actual smile this time, not the trained mask. Connor was watching too. The moment Delaney stepped away, Shaq saw Connor glide behind the bar and whisper to a junior staffer. Some kid no older than 19. Both glanced toward the couple. The kid chuckled under his breath. Shaq couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The look on Connor's face said enough. Disdain. Judgment. A smirk that smelled like superiority. Delaney returned to the kitchen doors. As she passed, Connor leaned in and said something low. She didn't break stride, but her smile dropped, just for a second. before she disappeared through the swinging doors. Shaq noticed. Nobody else did, but he noticed. The tension didn't explode. It simmered. That's what made it worse. This wasn't overt racism, the kind people film and post online, the kind that sparks hashtags. This was the everyday version, the kind that lives in posture, phrasing, looks, the kind that slips past corporate policies because it's built into the walls. Shaq had built Lucille's table to be immune to this. But here it was, infecting the very foundation, hidden in the open. Shaq shifted in his seat. He didn't need to be famous today. He needed to be awake. This wasn't about a business anymore. This was about integrity, about how systems erode silently when the people in power don't listen for the quietest cries. Delaney re-emerged, face steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed glasses on the counter. She didn't speak. She didn't complain. She just kept moving. Shaq noticed she rarely stopped to chat with other staff, not because she was unfriendly, but because no one opened space for her. The inner circle servers like Macy, Tyler, and Luis had their rhythm, their jokes, their group chats. Delaney floated outside of that, orbiting their camaraderie without ever being invited in. At one point, a dish cracked loudly in the kitchen. Someone had dropped a plate. Everyone turned, briefly startled. Connor chuckled and called out, "Better not be Brooks. That porcelain's worth more than her hourly." Laughter. Light. Thoughtless. But laughter all the same. Shaq stared, unblinking. Delaney had flinched. That flinch, that subtle twitch. It said everything. It said this wasn't new. It said she'd been through weeks of this, maybe longer. A drip feed of subtle degradation. No direct threats, no paperwork violations, just enough disrespect to drown her spirit an inch at a time. Shaq didn't move, not yet. He wasn't here to blow up. He was here to understand. The kind of hurt happening here wasn't solved by slamming doors or issuing public firings. It was systemic, layered, protected by polite smiles and plausible deniability. And it was his responsibility now, because this wasn't just any restaurant. This was his mother's name on the door. Across the room, a family of 4, black middle-class, Sunday-best energy walked in. Shaq watched as Delaney instinctively turned to greet them, but Connor stepped in, pointed at another server, and directed them toward the family instead. Delaney stepped back, silent. Her eyes flicked downward. Another subtle cut. Shaq's jaw clenched. His fingers curled under the table. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was everywhere. And no one was doing a damn thing about it. Not yet. Shaq had walked into hundreds of his businesses before, gyms, schools, foundations, restaurants, and he always made it a point to check the infrastructure, the people, the pulse. But this time was different. This wasn't a courtesy tour, this wasn't branding, this was reconnaissance. The moment the lunch rush thinned and the staff energy shifted into cleanup mode, he slipped quietly behind the kitchen and into the narrow hallway that led to the operations room, a small windowless space labeled staff and security only. No one stopped him. No one even noticed. That was the advantage of being forgettable when you wanted to be. Inside, the hum of electronics filled the cramped room. The air smelled faintly of burnt dust and electrical warmth. On one wall, a small bank of monitors showed split feeds from across the restaurant hallways: main floor, kitchen door, break room. Beneath the monitors, a touchscreen console logged access to footage and activity, all integrated through the central security system. Shaq stepped up to the screen and tapped in the override code. Only 3 people had access to this level: 2 regional directors and him. The interface lit up. He took a breath and tapped into the timestamp logs, scrolling backward through the day's footage. His fingers hovered over the playback icon, and for the first time in a long time he hesitated. He wasn't afraid of what he'd see. He was afraid of how normal it might be, how easily something cruel could look like business as usual when caught on camera without sound. He found the entry that matched the moment he'd heard the crying. About 40 minutes earlier. Playback initiated. The hallway feed first. Shaq saw Delaney emerge from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand. She looked hurried, distracted. Connor appeared moments later from the opposite direction, stopping her just before the break room. There was no audio, but even without it, the scene was sharp. Connor stepped in close, finger pointed slightly, then crossed his arms in that smug, overconfident stance. Shaq had seen too many times from self-important men who mistook rank for respect. Shaq watched Connor lean in, further. Delaney didn't speak. She just kept her eyes down. He said something, long, fast, jabbing with every phrase. She flinched slightly but didn't respond. Then he turned, muttered a final comment and walked off with a satisfied smirk. Delaney stood there for several seconds, frozen. Then she pushed the break room door open and disappeared inside. Shaq fast-forwarded 10 seconds. There, another camera mounted in the corner of the break room ceiling captured her sinking down into a chair, head in hands. The sobbing wasn't visible, but her shoulders trembled, her breath rapid. She was unraveling quietly, with no one to see her but the blinking red light of a camera designed to catch theft, not tears. Shaq clenched his jaw. He rewound the hallway feed, watched it again, slower this time. Connor's face didn't twitch with aggression. That was the worst part. No red flags, no raised hands, no threats. Just poison in a suit. Calm, composed, professional hatred. He clicked a different feed, one from earlier in the day, 2 hours before lunch, when staff were prepping. Another interaction. Connor called Delaney over, motioning with an impatient wave. She came, notebook in hand. He snatched it, flipped through the pages, then laughed. Actually laughed. He mouthed something that made her posture stiffen. Then he handed it back like it was trash. As she turned to leave, he mimed wiping his hands. Shaq rewound, watched again. Same actions, same implication. Connor was mocking her ambition, mocking her presence, mocking her skin. Shaq stepped back from the monitors, the quiet hum of the room pressing against his chest like weight. His stomach twisted, not from shock but from recognition. He'd seen this before, growing up in locker rooms where coaches played favorites, in meetings where people thought he didn't understand their jokes, in business deals where his voice only mattered if it entertained. This wasn't new, it was ancient. But seeing it here in a place built with his name, with his mother's values, in a building he thought was safe, made it unbearable. He tapped into the incident logs. Nothing reported. No complaints. No HR entries tied to Connor. Clean record. Too clean. The kind of clean that meant people either didn't feel safe enough to report, or had learned that reporting changed nothing. That silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. Shaq pulled up the staff rotation. Delaney had only been on the schedule for 3 weeks. She worked doubles on weekends. No sick days, no time off. Always early, always closing. She had the pattern of someone trying to prove herself, someone trying to be invisible and indispensable all at once, and Connor had seen that, and targeted it. Shaq leaned forward again, his eyes scanning every angle of the hallway footage, noticing small things now, the way other staff avoided Connor's gaze when he passed, the way Delaney kept her head low, but her eyes alert, the way certain customers got quicker service than others, not because of volume, but because of assumption. It wasn't just a Connor problem, it was a culture problem. This was systemic, and it had gone unnoticed, unreported not because no one cared, but because the system had taught them not to bother. He took one last look at the footage. Delaney in the break room, holding herself together with shaking hands, breathing like every inhale might collapse her ribs. Then she stood, wiped her eyes, adjusted her apron, and walked out like nothing had happened. Shaq powered down the screen. He didn't need to see more. The truth had been caught, but the truth was never enough. Not on its own. It needed a reckoning. Quiet, controlled, calculated, the kind that tore down the invisible walls brick by hidden brick. As he stepped out of the security room and back into the rhythm of the restaurant, Shaq wasn't just the owner anymore. He was the witness. And soon he'd be the one to rewrite the rules of this place, starting with the man who'd thought no one was watching. The employee room was quiet when Shaq walked in, its walls lined with scuffed gray lockers and laminated safety posters that hadn't been updated in years. A faint hum came from the overhead lights, casting a sterile yellow glow that seemed to suck the warmth out of the space. The shift had rotated, half the crew out on the floor, the other half on break or clocked out. It was the lull between lunch and dinner, the kind of silence most employers used to breathe. But Shaq wasn't breathing. He was looking. He moved slowly through the narrow aisle of lockers, glancing at the names scrawled in dry erase ink. Across the fronts, Louise, Macy, Troy, Delaney. Her locker was near the end, third from the bottom, dented near the handle like someone had kicked it once, but never mentioned it. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe nothing. But something told him that stories didn't end in restrooms or surveillance footage. They always left footprints, even if no one followed them. He bent slightly, noticing the locker door didn't shut all the way. Just a sliver of a gap, enough to catch the corner of something peeking out from behind the inner wall. A bit of paper folded over multiple times, yellowed at the edges like it had been waiting for someone long forgotten. He hesitated, then gently pulled it free. The paper was creased, fragile but intact. On the outside, a single line written in pencil. To someone who will listen. He sat on the wooden bench and unfolded it. The handwriting was tight, rushed, like the thoughts had come faster than the writer could control. The first line hit like a punch. If you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to send it. Or maybe I did, and it went nowhere. The words spilled from the page, heavy and direct. Delaney had written the letter in the second week of her job. She had seen things by then, felt them. She recounted how Connor gave her the worst shifts, how he criticized her work while praising others for less, how he made comments about her fitting the diversity quota and called it a joke when she didn't laugh. She wrote about how he'd stand too close, how he'd whisper under his breath, how he'd make her redo tasks that were already finished, how the others saw it, but no one spoke up. Then came the worst part. I went to HR. I followed the rules. I scheduled a meeting with the rep. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I stayed calm and laid it out clearly, someone would see what I was going through. Shaq's hands tightened around the edges of the page. The woman in HR smiled at me the whole time, nodded, took notes, said she'd handle it discreetly, said I was brave. Then the truth unraveled in ink. 2 days later, Connor called me into his office and told me not everyone here appreciates complaints. He said family looks out for family. I didn't know what he meant until I checked the HR email signature again. The rep's last name, D. Shaq read the name twice, then once more to be sure. Connor's cousin. Of course, the entire system, a closed loop. Every path Delaney thought led to safety circled back to the man who made her feel small. Every complaint, every whisper, every attempt to escape was caught and pulled back in. She'd written the letter as a last resort, and then he assumed she never sent it. Maybe fear held her back. Maybe she realized there was no one to send it to. Until now, Shaq sat there, frozen, the letter in his lap, and the heat rising in his chest. It wasn't anger, not the explosive kind. It was something heavier. Guilt, responsibility. This place bore his name. He'd built it with the idea that it would be different. He'd believed that good intentions built good institutions. But he'd been wrong. Institutions only stayed good if you kept your hands in the dirt, digging, checking, listening. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his pocket, as if protecting something sacred. Because it was. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was testimony. It was weight. It was a voice carved in silence. The room around him felt even colder now. The posters on the wall about zero tolerance for harassment felt like paper shields. The laminated employee rights brochure curled up in the corner was a joke, unread and untrusted. The locker next to Delaney's was missing a nameplate. Maybe someone else had left. Maybe for the same reason. He stood slowly, heart pounding not with rage, but with resolve. This wasn't a fix-it-with-one-meeting kind of problem. This was an infection in the bones of the place. Shaq didn't want revenge. He didn't need a spectacle. What he needed was a reckoning. A systemic shift. The kind that didn't just protect people like Delaney, but gave them power. As he turned to leave the room, he glanced back at her locker. Still dented, still slightly ajar. It felt like a scar that hadn't healed right. He stepped into the hallway, more determined than ever. Now it wasn't just about one confrontation or one manager. Now it was about legacy. He thought of his mother, what she'd taught him, how every name carried weight, how silence was a weapon in the wrong hands. Lucille's table wasn't just a brand. It was supposed to be a shelter, a place of dignity. He had the letter. Now he had a mission. And this time someone was going to listen. The afternoon rush had thinned to a gentle murmur, the kind of lull that invited long lunches and whispered conversations. Shaq remained seated at the corner booth, hood down, posture low, gaze relaxed but watching everything. From behind his tinted lenses, he observed the flow of his restaurant, how it moved, how it breathed, how it tolerated things it shouldn't. The door chimed softly. 4 men entered, corporate types, all polished shoes and boardroom swagger. Their laughter reached the floor before their presence did, and Connor was already moving across the dining room to greet them like they were royalty. He shook their hands with too much energy, patting shoulders, nodding at jokes he didn't even wait to hear. Shaq recognized two of them, early investors in the Lucille's Table expansion project. He remembered the negotiations, the way they praised his vision, while talking mostly about return margins and brand equity. They hadn't been involved in a while, but their presence today made sense. Connor had likely invited them to show off, flex a little power, feel important by proximity. They took a table near the center of the dining room, right in the open, where they could be seen. Connor stood at the edge, laughing before they'd even ordered drinks. Shaq could hear snatches of the conversation, buzzwords about scale, performance metrics, franchising. The talk was easy, smooth, dressed up in business language, but the undertones were sharp. Posturing, power exchange disguised as friendship. Then the door opened again. A black couple stepped inside, mid-40s, dignified, casual but sharp in their dress. The woman carried herself with poise, the man with quiet confidence. They looked around, scanning for a host. There was a flicker of uncertainty, just for a second, as if they weren't sure they belonged. Shaq watched the moment stretch, and then he saw it. The look. One of the suited investors turned his head toward the couple and made a low, offhand comment, too quiet for most to hear, but not quiet enough. Shaq didn't catch the full sentence. He didn't have to. The way the others reacted told him everything. Two snickered behind closed mouths. The third let out a forced cough to tour a laugh, and Connor, standing right there, threw his head back in exaggerated amusement. It was the kind of laugh meant to impress, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed he was one of them. Shaq didn't move, didn't flinch, but inside a slow fire lit. He watched as Delaney was motioned toward the couple. Connor, with a flick of the hand, directing her like she was part of the furniture. She didn't hesitate, didn't show any reaction. But something in her walk was different. A stiffness, a tension that said she had heard it too. She led the couple to a booth near the window, offering menus and water with a grace that defied the insult just moments behind her. Connor returned to the investors, still chuckling, talking about how hard it is to hire people who get the culture. The men nodded, one of them commenting about how the younger generation just can't take a joke. Shaq heard every word. He didn't write it down. He didn't record, he didn't need to. It was burned into memory now, etched deep enough that no denial could erase it. His hands were folded on the table, calm, his face unreadable. But his silence wasn't absence. It was calculation. Because this wasn't the moment to stand up and explode. That would be expected. That would be dismissed. Shaq being emotional. Shaq overreacting. They'd twist it. They always did. But he wasn't going to give them a headline. He was going to give them a reckoning. He watched Delaney return to the table with a pitcher of water. Her eyes flicked toward the center of the room. Just a flash of contact with Shaq's. A spark of recognition. She blinked once, then looked away. He didn't react, but in that glance, something passed between them. Understanding, alignment. The four men carried on, talking about profitability and control, about refining the customer base, a phrase that made Shaq's teeth grind behind closed lips. Every word was cloaked in professionalism, but the rot was right there, just under the skin. This was how racism survived, disguised as policy, hidden behind humor, embedded in hiring decisions and culture fits. Connor laughed again. Loud. Too loud. Performing. Shaq stared at the table of four and saw everything he'd been fighting against his entire life. Not just the blatant disrespect, but the more dangerous version. The kind that looked like order, like business, like structure. It was a system, and Connor was not just part of it. He was thriving inside it. But not for much longer. Shaq leaned back in the booth, his mind already 2 steps ahead. Plans forming. Contacts ready, systems being realigned in silence. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived, and no one at that table had noticed it yet. Dinner service was winding down when Shaq made his move. The dining room had dulled to a low murmur, the air thick with the scent of roasted garlic and peppered lamb. The lights were dimmer now, the kind of glow that made imperfections blur and truths easier to hide. But he wasn't hiding anymore. Not from himself, not from this place. Not from the truth he now carried in the weight of Delaney's letter, the footage, and the vile laughter from earlier that day. He'd seen enough. He knew enough. But knowing wasn't the same as acting. And tonight, that would change. Delaney passed by with a cleared tray, Her steps quick, her shoulders tight. The shift had been long. She hadn't cracked once. But Shaq saw it. How she paused every time Connor's voice echoed from the kitchen. How her smile never reached her eyes anymore. She didn't know he was watching. Not really. To her, he was still just another customer at a quiet table. Shaq waited for her to drop off the tray and circle back through the dining room. As she passed again, he reached for a clean napkin and scribbled a note in clean, deliberate penmanship. Short, careful. Meet me on the rooftop. After close. LT. He folded it into a triangle and placed it on the corner of the table, right where she'd spot it without a fuss. When she passed a third time, he caught her eye, not with a word, not with a gesture, just with presence. She blinked, saw the napkin, and hesitated for the briefest second. Then, without changing her pace, she slipped it into her apron and moved on. Shaq leaned back. The night moved forward. Dishes were cleared. Tables wiped. Staff clocked out one by one. Connor disappeared into his office without fanfare, likely confident that his day was done. The building began to exhale as the hum of conversation and clinking plates gave way to the quiet after hours, when the music still played but only for the walls. Shaq took the service elevator 2 floors up to the rooftop garden, a space few employees ever used after dark. It was part of the original design, an aesthetic statement about peace and escape, lined with soft string lights and waist-high planters full of herbs and flowers. No one ever really came up here. Too quiet, too vulnerable. But tonight, it was perfect. He waited. For 15 minutes, he stood alone in the dim glow of the string lights, watching the city hum in the distance. And just when he began to wonder if she'd brush it off as a prank or a mistake, the rooftop door clicked open. Delaney stepped out, cautiously, eyes adjusting. She was still in uniform. Black slacks, white blouse, hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked around like she wasn't sure what she was walking into. "You came," Shaq said, finally breaking his silence. She froze, startled. Her eyes widened when she saw who it was. "Wait, I'm Shaquille," he said gently, stepping out of the shadow, hands open, voice low. "But tonight, I'm just someone who listens." She didn't speak right away. He could see the tension crawling up her spine, the instinct to brace herself. For what? An accusation, a joke, another setup. She probably didn't know, but the fear had built into habit. "I saw your note," she said, unsure. "LT, Lucille's table." He nodded. "I read the letter in your locker." That stopped her cold. She went still, face shifting in a flicker of emotions. Shock, fear, anger, even shame. Her hands clenched. "You had no right to go through." "I know." Shaq cut in, calm but firm. "But I found it by accident. Behind the door. It wasn't locked. It was there, waiting, and I couldn't walk away from it." She looked down, shaking her head slightly. "I wrote that weeks ago. I never thought anyone would read it." "I did," he said, "and I believe every word." That silenced her. "I heard you crying in the bathroom earlier," he continued. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make it worse. I watched the footage. I saw the way he talked to you. I saw how you disappeared inside this place just to survive it. I saw everything." Her lips parted, eyes glassy now, but still guarded. "Everyone sees it. No one does anything." "Well, now they will," Shaq said. "I've already started making calls. Regional compliance, external HR, real oversight. Not in-house, not family ties. Everything Connor's done, the footage, the reports that never got written, it's all being compiled, quietly, carefully. I didn't want to go public. I wanted to go deep." Delaney sat on the stone bench beside one of the rosemary planters, staring out over the city. Her posture shifted, just barely, from defense to disbelief. "Why? Why would you even care?" Shaq took a slow breath, sat beside her, not close, just enough to show respect. "Because this place is named after my mother. Because I told the world it stood for fairness and opportunity. And because if I let someone like him rot it from the inside, then I've failed every single person who believed it meant something." Delaney blinked fast, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I thought I was crazy, like maybe I was too sensitive, that maybe I wasn't qualified. I started believing it." "You're not crazy," Shaq said. "You're surviving a system designed to erase people quietly, but not anymore." She looked at him now, not the basketball star, not the businessman, but the man sitting beside her in the dark, carrying her words in his pocket like gospel. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Shaq leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Now you get to breathe. Now you let me do the heavy lifting. You've carried this long enough." The rooftop settled into a calm silence between them, not empty, but full of weight lifted, of truth acknowledged, of an understanding built in the quiet where no one could interrupt it. "I don't want revenge," she said after a while. "Neither do I," Shaq replied. "I want accountability. I want change. I want no one else crying behind a bathroom door in my building." She nodded slowly, then stood. The tension wasn't gone, but it had softened. She looked at him one last time, and for the first time all day, there was something real behind her eyes. Hope. She turned and walked back to the door. Shaq remained seated, staring out into the city. The war had already started. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't fighting it alone. The next morning, Lucille's table didn't open to the public. A sign on the glass door read, "Closed for private leadership review. Reopens tomorrow." Most passers-by didn't notice, and those who did assumed it was a health inspection or a private event. Inside, however, something far more significant was unfolding. In the main dining room, tables had been rearranged into a U-shape, clean white notepads at each seat, pitchers of filtered water, and a silence that settled heavier than any dinner rush ever could. The kitchen was empty, the lights above the prep line turned off. Only the executive staff, regional directors, and compliance officers sat in the room now, suits with polished shoes, HR reps with their legal pads, and Connor Deeks seated near the middle, oblivious to what was about to come. Shaq entered last. No hoodie today, no disguise. He was in a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up just enough to show that this wasn't theater. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to lead. He took his seat at the head of the table, eyes scanning the group. Some avoided his gaze. Others sat upright, alert. Connor gave a tight smile, trying to mask the anxiety starting to stir in his posture. He didn't know yet. He thought this was a policy discussion. Maybe a brand adjustment. Maybe a casual realignment. Nothing that would threaten his seat. Not in a place where he'd been allowed to thrive for so long unchecked. Shaq didn't waste time with introductions. He tapped the remote. The first video queued up on the large screen at the end of the room. The footage was silent but damning. It showed Connor standing in the hallway, too close to Delaney, gesturing sharply. Then the break room scene. Delaney sinking into a chair, shoulders trembling, alone, no audio needed. The room watched without interruption. No one took notes. No one looked away. Then came a second clip. Connor laughing with the four investors at the center table. The subtle lean-in, the racial tone and body language, the dismissive hand wave toward the couple who had just entered, the laughter, the smirk, the way Delaney was ordered to serve them, even as Connor stayed comfortably planted at the investor's side. Shaq pressed pause. Silence. Then he took out the folded letter, the same one he had found behind the locker door. He opened it slowly, not for show but to honor its weight. "This letter was never submitted," he said quietly. "It was found tucked behind a locker. Maybe out of fear. Maybe because the author realized the system was rigged." He read it aloud. Every word, from the first line to the last. Not a single person interrupted. When he was done, he set it on the table and looked directly at Connor. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" Connor shifted uncomfortably. I can't say for sure. People write stuff all the time. Sometimes things are taken out of context." Shaq held up a hand, not aggressively, but firmly. "No, don't speak unless I ask you to. Not yet." He turned to the HR rep Trina Harlow, who looked like she'd aged 5 years in the last 10 minutes. Her hands gripped her notepad like a life raft. "This letter references an internal report that was never escalated. It claims the HR rep involved was related to the accused manager. Is that true?" She swallowed hard. "Yes. Connor and I are cousins. But I was not the decision maker. You were the gatekeeper." Shaq cut in, not with anger, but with gravity. "You were the first line of accountability, and you were compromised." Trina said nothing. Shaq looked around the table. "Here's what's changing," he said. "Effective immediately, we are severing all HR responsibilities from internal staff. We will contract a third-party ethics and compliance firm, independent of Lucille's table, to handle every harassment or discrimination report. All staff will be informed of this by end of day." A few heads nodded. He continued. We're forming a rotating oversight committee, comprised of employees at every level, kitchen, floor, bar management, but no one may sit for more than 6 months at a time. This prevents gatekeeping. This protects balance. He let the words sink in, then delivered the next blow. All camera footage will now be monitored through a cloud-based audit system with quarterly reviews by an equity consultant. This includes dining floor interactions, shift evaluations, and training sessions. There will be no blind spots. Now he turned to Connor. You're being terminated. Effective immediately. The words dropped like a pin in a silent church. Connor blinked. You're firing me? For what? Some edited footage and a letter that might not even. Shaq stood slowly. I'm firing you for creating an environment where staff feared your presence more than they trusted their employer. I'm firing you because I don't need a legal definition to know what a toxic culture looks like. I've lived through too many to pretend this is gray. Connor stood too now, his composure cracking. Shaq, I've been here from the beginning. I've built this place with you. We've had record numbers, strong margins, solid brand loyalty. And how much of that was built on silence? Shaq's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You don't get to wear success like armor when it was stitched from someone else's pain. Connor opened his mouth again. But the security staff was already standing at the back, not aggressive, just present. He looked around the room, saw that no one would speak for him, and finally his shoulders slumped. He walked out without another word. Shaq turned back to the room. There's no point building a name if it doesn't mean safety, he said. Lucille's table is not a performance. It's a promise. And today, we kept it. The meeting ended not with applause, but with a silence that meant something had shifted. For the first time in that building, the silence wasn't fear. It was relief. The morning after the meeting, the restaurant felt different. The air moved lighter, like a storm had passed and left clarity in its place. Staff trickled in with cautious energy, curious, hesitant, but somehow freer. The silence wasn't thick with fear anymore. It had thinned out, stretched into something new. Still cautious, still fresh, but cleaner. Something had cracked open, and the light was finally getting in. Delaney arrived for her shift the same way she always did. Early, quiet, tucked into herself. But something about her had shifted too. There was no manager's glare waiting for her. No forced smiles. No unspoken tension. The weight she'd grown used to carrying just to survive the day had begun to lift. Slowly, subtly, like her lungs could expand just a little more. She changed into her apron, tied her hair back, and stepped onto the floor. Her movements were the same, but now they held something steadier. Each greeting to a customer, each plate she balanced, each pass by her coworkers, came with a subtle, almost invisible reclaiming. The day unfolded without incident. No corner looks, no orders barked with that cruel undertone. The only sound beneath the rhythm of service was the quiet trust beginning to build again. Shaq arrived mid-shift. No suit this time, no disguise either. Just him present, grounded, watching. He didn't approach her right away. He simply observed, not to inspect, not to test, but to witness. This was her moment, not his. When the lull between lunch and prep arrived, Delaney found him by the host stand, sipping iced tea and flipping through a small leather notebook. She approached, a folded paper in her hand, and stood quietly until he looked up. He already knew. Her expression said the rest. I wanted to hand it in myself, she said. Didn't want it passed through hands or sent in an email. Just straight up. He took the paper, opened it, read the top line. Formal resignation, effective immediately. Shaq didn't speak for a moment. He looked at her face, then back at the page. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no resentment, just calm, strength, a kind of peace people earn the hard way. You sure? He asked. She nodded. I've accepted another position. It's a non-profit-run kitchen across the city. They run culinary mentorships for underserved youth. I'll be managing a training team there. Shaq's brow lifted, not in surprise but in respect. That's good work. That's real work. She smiled. Yeah. And I think I'm ready to teach again. The word again caught his ear. He didn't push, but it told him enough. She'd been more than what she was allowed to be here. And now she'd found a place where she didn't have to shrink to fit. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small checkbook, tore a blank check free, and slid it toward her across the podium. Name your start, he said. Pay the team, build the space, or invest in yourself. No strings. Delaney looked at the check, then at him. She didn't even reach for it. You already did enough, she said softly. You believed me when no one else did. The moment hung between them. Honest, grounded, whole. Shaq nodded slowly, folding the check back into his pocket. Just know if you ever need a second kitchen, I've got walls. She grinned. I'll remember that. The rest of the shift moved like a slow dance toward closure. She cleared her last table, handed off her apron to the back counter, and paused by the kitchen door. A few coworkers gave her quiet nods, some unsure how to say goodbye, others still working out how they'd missed what had been happening. But none of it mattered now. Delaney didn't need their validation. She was already moving on. Shaq followed her out the staff exit. The alley behind the restaurant was sun-drenched, warm bricks and soft concrete. No one else around, just the two of them. She turned to face him one last time. You changed this place, she said. You did, he corrected. I just finally paid attention. They shook hands, not with formality, but with respect, equal footing. She turned and walked toward the street, her bag slung over one shoulder, her stride strong, not fast, not hesitant, free. Shaq stood there watching until she disappeared around the corner. He didn't feel sad. He didn't feel proud in the way people usually meant it. He felt steady, like something had finally realigned, like a wound had closed. Not without scar but with purpose. Back inside, the restaurant continued on, servers moving, chefs prepping, music drifting softly across clean floors. The rhythm of Lucille's table hadn't changed, but its soul had, and that made all the difference. The late morning sun filtered through the front windows of Lucille's table, casting soft beams across polished tables and fresh-cut flowers. It was a slow weekday, the kind Shaq always liked best, not because business was light, but because it gave the place room to breathe. He stepped inside quietly, without announcement, just like that first day. No entourage, no press, just a man returning to the space where everything had shifted. It had been a few weeks since the corporate meeting, since the firing, since Delaney walked away with grace and purpose. A few weeks since change came not with thunder, but with clarity. And now, things looked different, felt different. The energy had changed, not just at the surface but in the bones of the place. The hostess greeted him without hesitation. She smiled, not a rehearsed grin, but a real one. Good morning, Mr. O'Neill. You want your usual booth? Shaq nodded, appreciating that she didn't fumble over his presence. There was no overreaction, just recognition, respect, the kind of welcome you give to someone who doesn't need the spotlight to matter. As he walked through the dining room, he noticed it immediately. The staff was lighter, not in speed, but in spirit. Conversations flowed between servers, like they trusted each other. Kitchen staff moved with purpose, but also laughter. A server, Luis, if Shaq remembered correctly, stopped mid-shift to hold the door for a busser carrying trays. A manager, a new face named Rhonda, chatted with the barista and checked in with tables personally. There was harmony, not rehearsed, not polished, just real. He slipped into his booth, accepted a glass of lemon water, and looked around. His eyes didn't seek flaws today. They sought proof, and it was everywhere. Not in profits or decor, but in the absence of fear, in the presence of dignity. And then, as the rhythm of the restaurant moved gently around him, Shaq stood up and walked toward the back hallway. The staff didn't notice. He moved quietly, casually, down the same corridor where weeks ago, he had stopped cold at the sound of someone crying behind a bathroom door. Now, there was no sound. He stood still in front of it. Women's restroom, tucked beside the break room entrance. The tile floor gleamed beneath his feet. The faint scent of lavender cleaner floated through the air. But more than anything else, there was peace. No tremor in the walls. No muffled grief, just silence. The good kind. The kind that comes when people feel safe enough to not cry in secret. Shaq closed his eyes for a moment, remembering, not the details of what was said behind the door, but the feeling of it, that gut punch of helplessness, of witnessing someone's pain wrapped in invisibility. That was the moment everything had shifted for him. That unplanned return, that sound, that scent. I don't care if he's the manager. And now the door was just a door. A bathroom was just a bathroom. No ghost. No wound. Just another piece of a space that had begun to heal. He didn't need to go inside. He just needed to stand there. A tear welled up slowly, not from sadness, but from something deeper: recognition. That a single moment, a single sound, had become a catalyst. That one story, buried behind drywall and denial, had opened a path forward. And most of the people in the building didn't even know it had started with him standing right here, frozen outside a restroom, listening when it would have been easier to walk away. He wiped the tear before it fell. When he turned back toward the hallway, he passed the employee board mounted beside the break room door. The usual schedules and flyers were there, but something new had been added: a framed photo of the staff with a quote underneath. "We don't just serve food, we serve each other." At the bottom, in small type, it read, "In memory of the shift that changed everything." Shaq smiled. He returned to the dining area. His booth was still empty, his drink untouched. The world moved on. Orders taken, laughter from a table near the window, the barista humming softly while cleaning glasses, and no one pointed, no one whispered, no one tried to make it about him. Because this wasn't about him. It never really had been. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. No address, no stamp, just a name in black ink. Delaney Brooks. Inside was a short note. "I hope you're doing the kind of work that makes you sleep easy. The kitchen misses you, but we're better because you passed through." He left the envelope with the hostess before heading out. The door chimed behind him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. The street buzzed with traffic and life, but inside Lucille's table, everything remained still, grounded, honest. The system had shifted, not in showy declarations, but in new practices, in enforced boundaries, in trust rebuilt brick by brick. Shaq didn't look back. He didn't need to. The bathroom was quiet now, and the silence meant something had been restored. If this story moved you, remember, it's not just fiction, it's a mirror. The quiet moments we ignore can be the ones that change everything. Speak up, look closer, build spaces where silence doesn't hide pain, but honors truth. Change starts with who's listening. Be that person.